This is the Point of Struggle podcast with me, Zion, and my dad. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Zion. Well, this is pretty exciting. Here we are.
Yeah, our first episode.
That's right. Well, let me get into why I want to do this podcast. First and foremost, you came to me and said that you'd like to do a podcast, and I thought that was thrilling, compelling, and maybe a little. I don't think concerning is the right word, but it was something that made me think, I guess my little girl is, she's growing up and she wants to go face the world and, improve her command of her own worldview. And I just thought, boy, this is a tough time to want to do that in a public forum.
Yeah.
But I respect you. I respect you for wanting to do it that way. As far as the podcast itself and the title, that comes from a conversation that I had with my best friend. And we were talking, I actually don't even remember the topic that we were talking about, but he said the point of struggle. We have to find the point of struggle. And he was talking about it in a very chronological sense, and we're often talking about marketing and business, and so it was probably something in that context where it would be useful for most teams to identify, almost like in a post-mortem perspective that we do in tech and other business settings. When did the struggle transpire? When did it really come to a crux? And I immediately glommed onto that and said, oh, I love this. This is a double entendre, because not only do we get to identify the moment in time when the struggle appeared, but I think that most teams and most individuals would benefit largely from taking command of the narrative of the struggles in their life and endow them with meaning. And you know me, I'm want to dwell on almost all double entendres, sexual or otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, how about you?
I think, my reasons for doing this podcast were primarily just, I'm not very good at journaling, you know this, but I've had a want recently to have some sort of record of my thoughts and my growth as a person. I'm 18 now, right? And hopefully my thoughts will change and grow, right, as I get older. But I think it'd be really interesting to be able to look back at my past worldview and my current worldview, and just having conversations with my dad recorded for me to look back years and years in the future.
Well, I like it. So that's really inspiring and, maybe a little humbling to think of watching this or listening to this, years in the future. But I commend you for wanting to integrate something like accountability into your worldview. You've heard me use some of these terms, and I don't know how many of them stick with you, but just this idea that we have a priori assumptions about life, and then as life comes at us, either those assumptions are confirmed and affirmed, or they are countered by experience. And the wise individual, which I have not always been, will update their understanding and their assumptions based on experience. The other way I say this is, here's to hoping lessons taught or lessons learned. It's not a guarantee, however, right? Yeah. Often we get taught the same lesson over and over again because while it has been taught multiple times, we still have yet to learn it. And so updating those assumptions or updating our priors is a very useful way to build a robust and thoughtful worldview.
Agreed.
Okay, so in my experience of life, there have been many very fruitful struggles. So much that I think I've come to the belief that I am a piss-poor identifier of good opportunities. And when I say this, I mean I underweight and undervalue the intense oppositions that surface in life because of my inadequacy, because of my lack of capability, because of my lack of resources. Like the list goes on and on of all the things that, are stumbling blocks in life. And I've overestimated how much I would enjoy and remember the high points of life.
Yeah.
At 42 now, I'm like, I really can't point to too many high points that I remember. Most of them involve the people that matter the most to me. But from like a career perspective and from a personal growth perspective, almost everything that I remember stems from something hard.
Yeah.
So as we think about the struggles that we go through, and there are plenty, like what comes to mind for you right now, or what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think currently something like a specific struggle that's been on my mind is you recently shared with me this article about 1968, and it was kind of a timeline of just all of the events and what a kind of chaotic and somewhat revolutionary year it was for the United States. And one thing that really stuck out to me because of its similarity to 2020, where we are right now, was the civil rights movement, right? And the civil rights movement has been working for a long time, right? But it was really big in 1968. And it has resurfaced in the eye of like mainstream media. Probably like, I think it really built up about the beginning of last month, June. And because of this resurfacing, it's made, we live in Utah, right? Primarily white. Most of my friends are white. And it's been really interesting to have all of my peers and close friends suddenly be really open to talking about the topic of race, which is something I've tried to get people to talk about for a while. But it's been interesting to hear their experiences and kind of the things they didn't realize about it and their assumptions. And it made me realize that I, a white person, have had a particularly unique experience with and view on the topic of race.
So what do you say that, you just said you're a white person, and I agree, you look pretty white.
It's true.
Your name kind of is a little at odds with that.
Zion Gonzalez.
Right.
Or Gonzalez, if you say it lazily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why are you white, Zion?
Well, I'm white because my dad is half white and my mom is all white, and that's
Man, that
usually
was a missed
how
opportunity
genetics
for
work.
a Mean Girls quote, but yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's why you're white, right? Yeah, because you're mostly white.
It's true. It's true. And I thought it was just really... I just lost my train of thought. And with all these conversations coming to light, the unique experience I've had is with a brown dad and a white mom, and a half brown family, right? I grew up being really aware of race from a really young age. And it was really simple. Like, you'd look at your skin, you're like, man, my skin's paler than the skin of my grandpa or my aunts or my uncles, like your siblings, right? And it was just, it wasn't negative at all. It was just an observation, because that's how children learn and understand the world. They observe differences and similarities between themselves and others. And so I kind of always grew up with the identity of whiteness. And I would go and I would exist in spaces as a white person, and I would recognize I'd be in a room, as I often am, living in a predominantly white state. I'm like, oh, I'm a white person in a room full of white people, and we're all interacting as people of the same race. But then sometimes I'd go into classrooms, right? I have a more diverse than average for this area high school, and I'd be like, oh, I'm the only white person in this room. And it was fine, and I wasn't bothered or uncomfortable with it. I was just like, it again was simply an observation. And talking to a lot of my peers, it came to my attention that my friends are just existing in the world as people, not as white people or not as brown people or black people. They're just existing as people. They see themselves as the default. And so they'd go into a room full of people, and then they would look and they'd be like, oh, there's a brown person.
So I'm going to challenge that a little bit because I would guess that most of your friends, most of your friends are white. And so, yes, they definitely see the world as like, there's people. But I can almost guarantee that any of your brown friends do not go into a room and think, there's just a bunch of people in here.
Oh, yeah, this is for sure. I think I probably misspoke earlier, but yeah, and like that was something in contrast. I would talk to primarily my Hispanic friends and a couple of my black friends, and they're like, no, yeah, we're always very aware that we're the only brown or black person in a room, or there's not a lot of us, because they have to be. Like, that has been something that they've had to be aware of forever.
I like where you're taking the conversation. I'm curious to get to the struggle, but let me dwell on something that I find charming. So your mother and I, we decided to raise our family here, and I think for Mindy that this is a pretty straightforward thing. Like, it's near enough to her family.
Yeah.
My family now lives nearby. So it has a lot of support network type of benefits. It feels a lot like where she grew up in Idaho.
Yeah.
The predominant religion is the religion that both of us grew up in heavily, and very... for those who are not acquainted with the Mormon religion, we would say that it was a very orthodox style upbringing. But this, if you're not familiar with Mormons, this is not to say that we were fundamentalists. So it's not like polygamy, nor is it like in New York with Hasidic Jews or something of that type. When we say Orthodox Mormonism in Utah, it's just very it's very conservative. It's very Republican. It's very white.
Yeah.
And people, they abide by, standard principles of, don't drink alcohol, don't drink coffee, don't swear, don't watch R-rated movies. There's a laundry list of things that I think anybody growing up in a very conservative Christian household would go, oh, okay, it sounds like my household. If you didn't grow up in any of those places, then it would feel very odd, cloistered, and a little sheltered, right? So you waking up to the reality that you are a white person in situations and noticing almost immediately and instinctually noticing the dynamic in a room is how most people of color experience life in the U.S. and in most industrialized countries.
Yeah.
And that makes me happy because it means that for all of my misgivings about, where we've lived, you managed to wake up to these realities. And that type of understanding is so important. It's not comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's important. And it's important because it shapes the kinds of things that we care about. And it helps us see the nature of the family of humanity. That it, something that you've said is, and even in this conversation, the idea that most people, especially white people, walk into a room and they think nothing of a room full of white people. It's just, we're people here. And then they walk into a room with one black person and they think, there's all these people in here and there's a black person. And the black person is the only peculiar thing in the room. Instead of recognizing, I'm in a room full of white people and there's a black person. There's only one black person in this room full of white people. Just noticing that everybody actually has a label attached to their perceived identity is a healthy level of observation.
Yeah.
So what have you done with this observation? Or how does it frame the way you sit in 2020? Or if you want to, what are the salient points of 1968 that kind of come to the forefront for you as you face 2020?
I think, I'm not totally sure. I think in 2020, with kind of this discussion of race, it's made me, can we pause this?
It's pretty hard to pause.
It's pause.
But I can cut this out.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I'm just going to talk about how this conversation, I feel like I talked too fast, and I think, I don't know, it all sounded better in my head and like flowed better, and I think I just kind of got sidetracked, and I don't know, I don't like how it's flowing, and it feels awkward to me, and I don't think I said everything that I wanted to say like the way I wanted to say it. And so I'm just not sure what to do, because I feel like I kind of got ahead of myself, and now I don't have anything left to talk about.
So this is okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is still, like, I'm still practicing, but...
Yeah. Something that you're going to face with recording your thoughts
Yeah.
is the recognition that it doesn't sound as good as it was in your head.
Yeah.
And the process of getting to a place where you actually sound better than what is in your head is on the other side of a tremendous amount of thoughtful practice.
Yeah. And I think another issue is I didn't like how I sounded talking, because I feel like it might have been better if you had led into it, just because I don't want it to just be like, it just felt like I was saying things, you're like, yeah, that's exactly what people should do, you know, like, this is the right way to be a white person. And I don't want it to be like that. Like, it felt too preachy to me personally, and I don't want it to come across like that.
Well, then we'll leave this in, because this is the point of this. So the struggle that you're identifying is the struggle of why or what has happened in 2020 that has allowed people who have never engaged the topic of race with you to suddenly engage. Maybe it does come across as a little too preachy. I don't know, but you know,
because I don't think that I know how to, like, I don't think I have life figured out.
Right, but you do have some particular types of moments in your life where I love the stories of, you're in a high school class and they're taking roll. It's the first day of class. And the teacher says Zion Gonzalez. And what transpires?
And
did they even say Zion Gonzalez?
They usually say Sion Gonzalez if, and only if, they're a white guy who went to a Spanish-speaking country for his mission. So he was a Mormon missionary, and he learned Spanish. Yeah.
And here he's going to be culturally sensitive and say Sion Gonzalez.
Because my name's really obviously easy to not the most PC, but Mexicanize. It's so easy. You just make them all.
And so then what happens? So you raise your hand. You're like, well, that's my name.
Well, I have a distinct memory of being in sports conditioning, right? And we had the football coach who was in charge of sports conditioning, which was kind of funny because he loved it. Like, you could tell he loved teaching a bunch of girls because we were just so much nicer to him. And like, we were just...
So he legitimately enjoyed it.
He legitimately enjoyed teaching us so much. He thought we were hilarious. Yeah. But like, he was calling roll, like probably the first or second day that we had that class. And he said, Sion Gonzalez, because he's just Hispanic. And so he was just speaking in his accent. And he looked over me 3 times. And I was like, here, sounding like a white girl and looking like a white girl, and he looked over and he's like, and I was like, here, I'm right here, and he said straight out, he was like, oh, you're not what I was expecting. And he's the only person who's ever actually said that, but it's been really obvious that everyone who's ever called my name in roll has thought exactly that.
So, I mean, this is almost a Key and Peele-esque type of experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to dig into this particular experience any deeper than needed, because I don't know that it holds a lot of fruit, right?
Yeah.
That it's going to bear a lot of fruit. But how does that, like, what does that do to your understanding of life? Like, do you just dismiss it, like, haha, honest mistake, or silly, or do you feel hurt or shamed, like, oh man, I guess I don't look like a Mexican? Like, what goes through your head with
I think
this
it was
kind of...
always just funny. Like, it's mostly funny. Like, I feel like I have a pretty good sense of humor about myself and just life. And so I usually don't take it personal. I'm like, oh man, this guy's a racist. You know, like, that's never what I've thought. But it's just been interesting because it's kind of just reminding me that I don't fit into people's assumptions.
Right.
And it reminds me that there are assumptions about these things. You know, and I think that's another thing, like, we as white people, right, like me and all the rest of the white people, like, we can just kind of go around assuming that everybody's having the same assumptions about everything as we are. And we just, like, it really did. Like, it just brings forward the idea, like, oh, so people really do assume what you're going to look like based on your name. And you're like, and I don't know if I can say that's that necessarily a super bad thing or a super good thing, right? Like, but it's
just
true.
a human thing.
It's just a human thing.
Right.
And so it kind of brought me back to like, oh, people expect me to look a certain way for my name, and I don't look a certain way.
So let's dig into that struggle, because I think this is a low key enough topic that we can actually look closely without getting too without having to worry too much about how you feel about this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know we've had some pretty direct and candid conversations in the past, but I don't necessarily want to dig so deeply as to make you feel too vulnerable in a recorded conversation. I mean, we can work up to that, right? And you can try and do the other to me, but I think, you can let the audience know that's
You are going to be offended. I'm just telling you right now.
That's right. Okay. All right. So here you are. You're about an average height, average build white girl. Mm-hmm. And your dad, who's half white, decides to give you a name that is decidedly Hispanic.
Yeah.
My rationale for doing it was, on the last name, I didn't have an option. Like, that's the name I was given. I just figured, we'll have this name. And talking to your mother, she's like, yeah, I'll take your name. It was very traditional. We come from a traditional kind of upbringing. She kept her, she didn't have a middle name given to her at birth. So she kept her last name for her family name as her middle name. We didn't do anything progressive, like I took part of her name and hyphenated it. We didn't do anything like that. We're just like, okay, so that's how we're going to do it. I revel in this kind of stuff because I really want my children to suffer. I do. Like, I really want you guys to suffer, and I want you to struggle.
Everybody knows kids who suffer are funnier, too. So.
They're funnier. They're more interesting. And I think your perspective on life has a healthy level of paranoia.
Yeah.
Being overly assumptive, I think it's good for balance sheet style success. Like, I think people who are very assumptive can become very rich, but they're not that interesting. And I've had lots of conversations with very rich people, and there's just not a lot there, about all they have is money. In the words of one of my favorite, journalists, they're so poor, all they have is money. So here you are, you're a white girl, you got the name Zion, and you have the last name Gonzalez. You know some high school Spanish, but you're not fluent. You're not bilingual. You heard me speak Spanish on occasion in the home, but we never made a point of learning it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. People make assumptions, and they immediately understand on some level what a thing is based on those assumptions. The struggle of your life is that you're not the thing that people expect.
Yeah.
Now magnify that outward. What is your understanding of what it means to be exactly what people expect, and that thing is not necessarily kind? Do you understand that question? So you're not a stereotype, like you don't match your name.
Yeah.
You know, the first people's impression, like, oh, she doesn't really match your name, right? That's interesting. And probably the more weird part of that is Gonzalez,
Yeah.
to borrow the Mean Girls, like, so why are you white? It's like,
You can't just ask people why they're white, Dad.
yeah, right, yeah, you can't. But what if you were Hispanic? Or what does it mean to go through the world as somebody who doesn't match the norm, who's not part of the majority class? What has been your observation being surrounded by, your aunts and your uncles and your grandfather and me? Like, if you dig a little deeper, what is the struggle there? What little bit of the struggle, or what big bit of the struggle do you tap into when you think about this concept of race?
Yeah. I think especially just talking to my friends and family members who are people of color they've expressed to me just the feeling of already having been put in a box before you've even met somebody, Like, you read, like, you get your name read off of a paper, and people already assume things about you, and they already assume, like, I've had friends express to me that they're like, oh, yeah, like, Hispanic kids don't do as good in school. And you're like, that's not true. Like,
or maybe it is true.
Maybe it is, but you're like, but I also think people often ask, I have asked them, like, why don't they? And often they're like, shit, that was kind of racist. Like, if you ask them why, they're like,
oh, because brown people are dumber.
Because brown people, yeah. And
I mean, that's what they're thinking.
But I'm also
because I know.
And I've talked to people, and I'm like, and I think one thing to borrow from, granted it has its problems, but the Disney movie Zootopia was kind of, I remember Nick, I think was the fox's name. Yeah. And Nick Wilde, Nick Wilde kind of expressing at one point in the movie, he's like, why would I act differently if everybody's just going to assume I act like this anyway? Like, everybody already thinks that I am the way I am. I might as well just be that way. Because nobody's ever going to allow me to get out of this box that they've put me in.
Yeah.
And I think that can be, like, I'm sure that's super discouraging to be. Well,
you can speak to being a woman too.
Yeah, like being
right?
a woman.
Because I'm
you're
sure
like,
that occurs, right? You're in a situation and like, well, you obviously can't lift this thing.
It's the classic case of just like the teacher asking male or female, usually female though, it's just like, do I have any strong boys who can help me carry this? And the women are just like, you look over at the noodle boy next to you and you're like, oh yeah, he's 100% the person you want to pick to lift that desk for you.
Yeah.
Not the 4 soccer player females in this classroom. And I think it's like, I've definitely felt like if people are going to just assume I'm a certain way, why even try to prove them wrong? Because like, are you even going to be able to prove them wrong? And I think the assumptions that people place on you, like the idea that Hispanic kids aren't as good at school, like if everybody already thinks you're not as good at school because you're brown, why, like you have minimal motivation to be good at school. Like, people are always going to look at you as less than because they're racist and they have bigoted assumptions about not white people. And like, I haven't experienced, like the most I've experienced, like with stress, is like people just being surprised that I'm not brown. But I'm like, I can only imagine what it'd be like to constantly feel kind of pigeonholed and like just because of something that you have zero control over.
Right. Okay, so this is a constant struggle of humanity, right?
Yeah.
We are just great apes, and there's a lot of animalistic, a lot of animalistic brain function that goes into almost everything that we do. When I look around at the world, part of me goes, well, unless you've dated somebody who's not the same color as you, you're a little racist. And and that's why I applaud the increasing indifference to color in younger generations, because they really can't answer. Like, well, yeah, I've dated all kinds of people, all different kinds of individuals of every stripe of life, and I try and judge them on the content of their character and not the color of their skin, or other things.
Yeah.
And I think that's commendable. It's not widespread, honestly, right?
Yeah.
The vast majority of us experience life the same way our little cats, experience life. So I don't know if you recall, because it was a long time ago, but when Miniature Kitty came to our house, Minnie, so she's a foster kitty because, Mindy has an enormous heart and cares about all things. And, so she's an all black kitty. She comes to our house. And I think it was on purpose, but, Mindy decides to introduce Minnie to our other cat, Noni, who is an enormous all black kitty, right?
Yeah.
Noni and Minnie see each other and instantly are transported back in time to being littermates.
Yeah.
They see each other and see something that reminds them of being, kittens.
Yeah.
And they play and they fawn over each other and they're instantly smitten with one another. And it was wonderful to watch, right? You see these little animals and it's wonderful to watch. I think there's something rudimentary and fundamental about that.
Yeah.
To your, probably to your benefit, you've grown up with brown people. So you see brown people and you think of them as people.
Yeah.
You might notice that they're all
And even
brown.
for, I think of them as family.
Yeah, you think of them as family, right? Yeah. So it's not weird to talk to them.
No.
It's not strange to think about them, having life and struggles and...
Yeah. I grew up with people with darker skin, and they've always just been exactly like the people in my life with lighter skin.
Yeah. And in some cases, better.
They have better food.
That's right. Better food.
They season their chicken.
That's right. Yeah, a boiled skinless chicken breast. That's the worst.
Disgusting.
Okay, so for you, this struggle is both immediate and historical, right? So historically, you have confronted the struggle of race, the question of ethnicity and differences and similarities, and you've gotten to a place where you're just aware that it is.
Yeah.
You have the benefit of recognizing that it means very little in the grand scheme of things, what color somebody's skin is.
Yeah.
Right? What would be your hope for humanity? And I know that's a huge question, but it's like, what if we're all just like our cats? And what if the natural state of things is division based on skin color and that kind of thing?
Well, I think one thing that I can't claim to know a lot about, the current Black Lives Matter movement, but I think one thing that I've heard a lot and that I've seen is a recommendation, right, for you to be a more empathetic person, like a white person to people of color, is to listen to the stories of people of color. And I think that's something that I personally have experienced, right? Something that I personally think and have seen make me a more empathetic person to people who don't look just like me. Growing up right? Like with you telling me about your experiences with racism, because I personally have never experienced racism, made it personal. Because it wasn't just racism is something that hurts those brown or black people over there. It was like, racism is something that hurt my dad and continues to hurt my dad. And like as a little kid, you're like, I don't want people to hurt my dad. Like that's just a natural child feeling. And I think if I had a hope for humanity, it would not be for us to be in a world where we don't see color. I think that's a cop-out for being aware, honestly. Like, people who are like, I don't see color, like, you just don't want to be involved. And you don't want to be empathetic to the struggles of people. But I think I want it to be where everybody, you recognize the color of people and you realize that it doesn't actually matter. And that it actually, like, and while it's part of that person, you can love them and you can have them be part of your family all the same. Like, I think my hope for humanity is for people to look at other people who look a little different from them and see their brother or their sister.
That's a wonderful hope.
Yeah.
And, when we talk about, the family of humanity or the human family, for all of the struggle that racism has been and for, the mean-spirited words and some of the unkind actions that have, been certain waypoints in my life, I've done a little bit of a study on, the condition of the human race, and can't help but note that for all of our problems, there are very few places that are even trying to create a melting pot reality.
Yeah.
We have the United States, and, and let's be honest, areas of the United States are doing better than others. But on the whole, the United States endeavors to be a melting pot.
Yeah.
I think recent events with Canada, they're trying to get some virtue signaling and value signaling around their amenability to race. But historically, they've not been a bastion of melting pot efforts. So they're our neighbor, and they're good people, and they're kind on the whole. And they definitely have some elements of their society that I think are kinder than our society. But they're not a bastion of the humanity of man or the family of man reality writ large.
Yeah.
Probably so after the United States, really what we have is our older brother, Great Britain. This is a place that on the heels of colonialism mostly has become a destination for all of the peoples that were part of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And it's not home base, but it's like the mothership. And it has become a place where you're going to see a lot of people in London of every color.
Yeah.
And they're endeavoring, and we can, everybody's taking their knocks because, currently there's this, a movement in the 2010s towards greater nationalism and populism and some racism all mixed in. But that doesn't entirely undo nor completely get cast aside with the boots on the ground reality that there's a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds in these two places.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it's a distant second place to say, so who's inviting everybody? Mm-hmm. I bring this up because, the struggle's real. Like most of the globe is not trying that hard.
Yeah.
And let's be frank and say that, and the ones who've excelled historically over the last 80 years are probably backsliding a bit.
Yeah. And even like as Americans, like even when we say we're like, man, we want to be a melting pot and we want people to be equal, right? Like it's not like we haven't succeeded in doing that yet.
No.
Like
yeah, with a history of racism and slavery and all the and when we say melting pot, I say that euphemistically. It's like, well, when you become white, then you're part of the melting pot. Yeah. Which makes it very difficult for people with dark skin because they'll never be truly white, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't stop us from marrying your daughters and your sons. So what can you do? When I think about these problems, so what is the point of the struggle in your life? Like, how does it motivate you and animate you to be? Because for me, I'll be candid, at 42 with a bunch of kids, and my work history, I'm typically working hard on big things and starting a company or something like that. Like, the problem of racism is real, but I'm not going to cash in all my chips to go become an activist.
Yeah.
That's kind of a young gun's game, right? Like, that's a young person's game. What about you? Like, how do you feel called, or what does this motivate or animate inside of you to want to do?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, like what I told you about, like I think stories are the most impactful. I would love to be able to use, my work. I am an aspiring illustrator to help share the stories of different people from different walks of life, who are different colors. And I would love to help share their stories in a beautiful way, even if their stories are filled with pain.
If you can do that, you will have accomplished something that few have, right? And I don't say that to discredit or to try and discourage you. I think that is a worthy struggle to take on, to tell the story of humanity, to tell the stories of individuals with all the warts and pain incumbent in traversing life as other or as different.
Yeah.
And to find a through line and a narrative that also tells the story of humanity as we hope that it is, that we hope that it will be.
Yeah.
That seems like an incredible and worthy thing to pursue. So what's going to get in your way to do that?
I don't know, probably if I just spend forever in Utah would probably be not the best decision to meet a bunch of different kinds of people.
Agreed.
But I don't know. Currently, I think the biggest struggle would just be my own lack of trying. Like, I want to get out into the world, whenever this quarantine corona business is over, or COVID-19, I guess. And just meet different kinds of people and just do things that'll help me meet different kinds of people, right? Like, I want to travel and I want to go do weird things. I want to go do normal things and just I just want to have a big world.
I think that's admirable. And I think it's a good strategy. there was a time, and I hesitate saying this mostly because I'm concerned about what an opportunity advanced education is for so many. For a lot of folks, pursuing advanced education is the path to making their world bigger. To paraphrase John Adams, I look at my children and I think your ancestors, and I'm just going to speak for my own family, come from Mexico and Germany, and they come here when getting here was not such an ordeal. It was hard and it was fraught with peril, but once you showed up here, they're like, yeah, welcome. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that you're going to be from Hamburg in 1943 in Oakland, California, and they're going to welcome you with open arms. Like, you're still the enemy. But you're welcome to stay here. You're welcome to, set up shop in San Francisco and eke out an existence. Coming from Jalisco, Mexico, and going to work in the steel mills in the Midwest, you weren't going to be bosom buddies with a bunch of white kids or a bunch of white families, but you were going to be allowed to be here, and you were going to be accepted as a contributor to society.
Yeah.
So there's some beauty in that background. I guess what I want to say is, I personally, and I know Mindy as well, your mother, we revel in the fact that you're not a doctor or a lawyer. We celebrate the fact that you're not pursuing engineering. We love the reality that you aspire to be and seek to be an artist. John Adams said that, this is the natural course of life. That, the first generation has to fight wars so that the second generation can build countries, so that the third generation can kind of grow those countries, so that finally the fourth generation can become the artists and the storytellers and the authors and the artisans. What you endeavor to do is, in my opinion, the apex of humanity and the human endeavor. So don't shirk this desire, right?
Yeah.
Like, really lean into this struggle, and be somewhat cavalier. I mean, you're young. You can be cavalier and unafraid, and whether it's actually courage or just stupidity, it doesn't really matter at this point.
Yeah. I really want to do it. I don't know what else to say. It's just, there's something about that just thinking about it makes me happy.
Yeah. And I think you're right. So, again, to circle back, the strategy of going and seeing the world, you could see it through the world, through the lens of a university or academia.
I think, frankly, I said this to a friend, I am too stubborn and skeptical of people to be able to go to a university and just have people tell me what the world is like and actually trust them at all.
Yeah, well, I commend that. And I don't think that university's bad.
I don't think so either.
I think some of your siblings are have a bright future in scholastic endeavors, and I think they will be lovely people because of it. And I'll have a conversation with them similar to this one, but it'll wend a different path. But you've heard me say, you need to go out into the world and see that everybody is different and everybody has the same problems, and that makes them all the same, right?
Yeah.
And it's this process, and you can't do that detached. You can't do that at an arm's length. You have to go get your hands dirty. You have to go get some dust on yourself. You have to go be other. Right? You have to go show up in a room where you're the weirdest thing there. You know, to paraphrase your mom, you know, to go into the Amazon rainforest and look around and actually be told by a bunch of Brazilian students, you are the most exotic person I have ever seen. White girl from Idaho.
Blonde hair.
That's right.
We'll do it.
Well, Zion, I look forward to these conversations. I think this is going to be a really fun thing. Do you have anything that you want to, say as we wrap up? How do you want to close this out?
I don't know. I feel like all I can say is don't judge us too harshly on this first episode. And I promise that I will get better at talking on recording.
I think you will.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.